growing out of your hair.
Oh, no. Okay. Tell me when to start, Deborah. What, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you
Okay.
Oh, yes. Okay, we can start anytime.
Okay. I'm Rebecca Jefferson, and I'm here at the Jacksonville Jewish Center on Crown Point Road in Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm here with Rabbi David Gaffney. It's November 7th, 2018, and also with us today is Buddy Shorstein. Rabbi Gaffney, just for the record, can you tell us your full name and date of birth?
Yes, it's David Gaffney. I was born August 10th, 1936.
And where were you born?
In Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem,
Israel. Palestine then, but now Jerusalem, Israel.
Right. Where did you go to school and then college?
My family moved to the United States when I was 4 or 5 years old. I spent the early part of my life going to school, grade school, and then high school at the Rabbi Jacob Joseph School, which was a yeshiva, a modern Orthodox yeshiva, in that it had classes, Judaic classes, intense Judaic classes in the mornings, and all of the secular classes, history, arithmetic, math, and so forth in the afternoon. I attended that school through my rabbinical years, and I was ordained at that school when I was 20 years old.
Mm-hmm. How large was the school? How many people went there?
Hundreds upon hundreds. It was a school that attracted children from not only the neighborhood, which was the Lower East Side in New York City, but it also attracted, I guess because it was a more modern day school or yeshiva, from Brooklyn and the Bronx and New Jersey, and the larger metropolitan Jewish area.
Right. You were only 4 when you came here, but were you fluent in Hebrew? Was that your first language?
Hebrew, actually, my parents spoke Yiddish most of the time. The school was a progressive school in that it allowed for 2 tracks, language tracks. So some of the students went to the Yiddish-speaking class, which many of the people who had emigrated spoke, and then there was a track for Hebrew language, and my parents coming from Israel, my being born in Israel, I continued on the Hebrew track.
Right, that makes sense. Were you raised as a conservative Jew? What made you identify with conservative Judaism?
No, I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, and was an Orthodox Jew through my rabbinical career. The rabbinical school that I graduated from, this yeshiva that I spoke of, was an Orthodox school. I began to, when I left the yeshiva and I was still going to college and taking classes at Brooklyn College where I earned my BA. I also was married at a very early age to my wife Inga, and in addition to going to school, I was also teaching in afternoon Hebrew schools. The one that I taught in for numbers of years was Temporal Israel in Great Neck, where there was a very prominent conservative rabbi, Rabbi Mordechai Waxman. I just enjoyed listening to him speak. I enjoyed the classes that he gave, and I began to realize that traditional Judaism could very well have been conservative Judaism. He pointed out in speeches and in classes and seminars the evolutionary nature of Jewish law, that Jewish law was always changing. I guess I took my blinders off and began to see Jewish history and Jewish life in a much broader scope. And I guess my own feelings. I started taking classes, philosophy classes. I received my master's in Jewish philosophy from Yeshiva University. Then I continued studying. I was attending Columbia University, where I was taking classes in religion. My exposure began to change, and my interest began to change. I started reading books that I had never read before, and began to identify myself as much more of a conservative Jew than the one which I was raised, the tradition which I was raised.
You have a strong academic background then, so what drew you to rabbinical school?
I think being the child of my family, it was a given that I would extend my Jewish training or my Jewish studies for as long as I could. And when I was 18, the prospects of attending the pre-rabbinic school in this yeshiva was attractive. It was certainly what my parents would have wished for me. And so I continued. And as I said, after I finished my rabbinical training, I continued in Brooklyn College, and as I said, my master's at Yeshiva University and then at Columbia University.
You mentioned your family background. Can you tell me a little bit about your mother and father, what they did, where they were from?
My parents were born in Israel as well. For some years in the 20s, my mom and dad came to the United States. My grandmother lived in the United States. Life in Israel, Palestine, was extremely difficult in those early 1920 years. And then when they came to the States, the Depression, and after being here for a few years, had two older sisters who were born before me, born in the United States. They decided that that they would return to Israel, and I was born there. We came back, quite honestly, because of the beginnings in the 1939, 1940, 1941. The Jewish community in Palestine was affected in an extreme way by the Arab population. Life in Jerusalem became difficult for that reason and also for economic reason, and my family decided to return to the United States. My father was a worker, a laborer. He had spent some years of his life as a house painter and then began to work in the luggage industry. My mom was a housewife for many years, and then she took on employment also in the very yeshiva in which I was being trained. We had a beautiful family life, a very much traditional life. Had two older sisters. A younger brother came along later. The Sabbath meals and Sabbath home life was just warm and special, that's who they were.
You mentioned your wife. Can you tell us again
yes.
her name and how and where you met?
My wife, Inga. We met at a Zionist organization, a religious Zionist organization called the B'nai Akiva, when I was 16. I met my wife. Inga came to the B'nai Akiva as well, and we were drawn to one another. We started to see each other regularly and began dating exclusively at that early age. And we were married just before I received my rabbinic ordination. We were really children of 20. I love to tell the story that when we went to the bureau, the marriage bureau, when we were just before we were married, my mom and dad had to accompany me because I was still underage to go to get our marriage license. So that's how we met.
Okay. So Inga was telling me a little bit about her fascinating history and how she got here. How did the two of you, because Inga wasn't from America, how did the two of you manage with the sort of the cultural differences? And was that?
I don't think there were really cultural differences of significance. Inga's background was different from mine, in that her family came from a cosmopolitan city in Vienna. My parents really, Palestine was a Levantine culture, and but I guess we loved each other to overcome whatever differences, and I guess the marriage has been exciting for some of the differences over the course of time. But when I met her, her family was also a Jewishly tradition, as my family was. And although I would point out that Inga probably had more liberal positions, religiously speaking, than I had, we learned to accommodate each other. I'm sure a level of observance, of commitment to Jewish life was something that rubbed off on her, and her love for fun and excitement and all of the wonderful cultural things that life offers rubbed off on me, and so that was a merger that we made.
Right. So, how soon after rabbinical school did the Jacksonville position come up, and how did you hear about that?
Okay. I was, as a result of my exposure to teachers and philosophers and rabbis of a more progressive bent, and my changes in my own outlooks on things religious and Jewish, as I said, I decided to study beyond the rabbinical school training. I wrote a dissertation, a master's dissertation, on Martin Buber, which is a very liberal Jewish philosophy. And then the classes that I took at Columbia University were also progressive. I taught for numbers of years in Hebrew schools and in the day school while I was attending university, and then I decided that I wanted to become a rabbi. I was doing, I was teaching in a day school in the morning and teaching in an afternoon school. I decided I wanted to become a rabbi, but my training was as an Orthodox rabbi. For me to join the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the association of conservative rabbis, I needed to serve as an intern for a number of years in other positions. I went to the seminary, or to the Rabbinical Assembly, that rabbinic association, and I became an assistant rabbi to a Rabbi Theodore Friedman in South Orange. He was a very scholarly man. He subsequently moved to Israel, and at the time that he moved, I realized that the congregation was not inclined to take this inexperienced first-year rabbi to become the rabbi of the congregation. So I became the assistant rabbi to a Rabbi Harry Halpern, who was a very prominent rabbi in Brooklyn, and I served that rabbi for 3 years. At that time, and probably in many congregations, a senior rabbi enjoys having a colleague for a number of years, but then wants him to find his own way. And when it was determined that Rabbi Halpern wanted me to strike out on my own, I began to investigate possibilities, and the position in Jacksonville was open and available, and I made the decision to explore those possibilities, and that's where the story begins.
Right. So what were your first impressions of Jacksonville? How did it compare to New York?
Some of my comments this evening reflect on those issues, which I will expand upon. I'm going to make reference to the fact that when we first drove to Jacksonville, I had already secured the position, and this relationship was already a go. We were driving from New York to Jacksonville. There was a problem on I-95. We needed to detour, and we drove through some of the local roads. I saw people picking cotton in cotton fields, which for me was like something out of a history book,
Right.
and signs reading Impeach Earl Warren, who was the Justice Supreme Court. It was different. It was very much, we needed to adjust to the different way of life. We came to the community for the first Shabbat, the first Sabbath that we were going to be here, and we were staying at the Heart of Jacksonville Motel, which was on Main Street in Jacksonville. And the signs read, "We don't serve customers if they don't wear shoes and jackets."
My goodness.
And I said to my wife, "I think we're no longer in Brooklyn."
Right.
And but quite honestly, the needs of the community were so significant that I didn't need to make an adjustment culturally. I was just really thrown into my responsibilities and the challenges that we faced. It may be that Inga had more of an issue there, but I think we found an extraordinarily warm welcome of many of the members of the congregation. There were those who were very anxious to make sure that life was as comfortable as possible, and thankfully some of the present company, Buddy Shorstein, his family, his sister-in-law Sylvia, and his brother Jack, the president of the congregation, just reached out to make our life as convenient as possible, as welcoming as possible.
Right.
So whatever the cultural issues were, we made that adjustment.
Right. Did you know, though, prior to coming to Jacksonville, that about the community and its history and some of the difficulties it was going through?
We knew some things. I quite honestly didn't realize that some of the divisions or some of the issues of the community loomed as large as they did. I noted the fact that it was a large congregation, and I was just hoping that with the help of the lay leadership, we would be able to find our way.
Right. You never found it so daunting that you thought about, I need to find another pulpit? Or
It was daunting. It was very daunting, and for a lot of reasons, a large congregation with many financial challenges that they had to face for the many years that I served here, not having the ability to know that I had some professional support in the clergy area. Most congregations of our size do have assistant rabbis or associate rabbis. There was just a lot of work. Mm-hmm. It was daunting, but we had a very committed lay leadership, and people were very close to the synagogue and very close, very hopeful of the success of the synagogue, that it just became possible. We just made our way through it.
There were some physical difficulties, though. Buddy was telling me that when the congregation was situated at 3rd and Silver, you had to bring your family across.
Yes, there were a lot of personal, issues, and my wife Inga had to bear that burden. Right. The house we lived in was on the south side. The congregation was in Springfield. Mm-hmm. We did not drive on the Sabbath, right. And so we were living in an apartment in Springfield, and not being at home, needing to know, especially for Inga, having to pack up and move food and everything and clothes, etc., to the downtown location was a hurdle. There was no question about it. I was busy with my rabbinic work, so the burden really fell on her. Our children, Asher and Shalva, who at that time were 13 and a half, 12, and so forth. Asher had just been bar mitzvah the year before. They also had to deal with the fact that on summer months, when the Sabbaths were long and the social stimulation, the social setting was not conducive to friends, there were long days, and we tried to entertain them as best as we could, but the downtown just did not offer for many of these opportunities. The apartment had a room heater, which didn't always heat every room in the house. We had one occasion where the plaster came off the ceiling, and my wife had to deal with a falling plaster, and it was an adjustment really for the children. So there were physical difficulties, and I will expand on that. This, of course, affected us not only personally, but it also affected the programs and the activities, with the synagogue facility being in Springfield, right. And the community living here on the south right. side.
So so then there was a new building talked about, started to get into action. At what point did you come in those plans?
Well, we were apprised of the fact that there was a lot of forethought on the part of the lay leadership of the congregation to purchase land on the south side of town. Don't remember specifically the sequence, but we, I think almost the second year that I was there, I've become cognizant of the fact that we began to talk about moving the congregation. That was a fundamental challenge that we had to face. It affected our schools, it affected our youth programs, it affected our services, and we just needed to be where the community lived. We began to talk about campaigns. There were any number of campaigns to raise funds to make the move possible. I think there was a photograph that I saw in one of the yearbooks that we published of a group of us standing here in Mandarin, and with shovels in hands, with hard hats, and beginning the process of plans to build.
I looked at some of those photographs in the archives too, and I was struck by the wonderful photograph of the procession of Torah scrolls on the day of the move. Can you tell us your
That was
your
a very
recollections?
special and memorable day. This was, I need to just introduce the fact that in the years before we moved, there were any numbers, there were meetings all the time. I just remember wall-to-wall meetings, and again with a very committed laity who had the challenge of trying to provide for the finances of the move, and at the same time dealing with the specifics of the construction of the synagogue itself. There were discussions about where different parts of the facility should be, where the stairs were going to lead, where the door stops were going to be put, and people poring over blueprints for what would become a very significant facility. At the same time, people were talking about how to raise funds for this building, and that there was, I counted as I looked at the archives, there must have been 12 or 14 different building campaigns over the years to make this facility possible. But I think it was in 1976 when we actually moved from the old synagogue to this location. I forget, it was a special Shabbat weekend, and we began with programs and prayers at services on that Shabbat in January, and then on Sunday, a very detailed, very actually worked for a long time on that program of moving the Torah scrolls out of the old building, the silver decorative pieces that appear on the scroll, and lay leaders of the congregation carrying the Torah scroll. We met on San Jose Boulevard in what was the Beauclair Country Club. We had a flatbed truck with a band and people carrying the Torah scrolls on the flatbed truck, and music, and hundreds upon hundreds of people walking on San Jose Boulevard with the accompaniment of the police, and moving into our new location.
Did anyone from outside of the community join in this occasion?
I know that the Times Union had it in the newspapers. I'm sure there were a lot of onlookers. We invited colleagues and members of other congregations to join us as well. We thought it would be a historic day, not only for us, but for the entire Jewish community, for the community at large. It was, as I said, I have vivid memories of people handing the Torah scrolls to each other, giving them the honor of carrying the scrolls until we walked into the facility. We had a very extensive program for this inauguration day. The congregation knew that the building was not in any way completed. I joke about the fact that the curtain for the ark was a shower curtain.
Oh dear.
and the chairs that we used were the old leather chairs that graced our gym and what we used for high holiday services. And often people who sat down on these old spring leather chairs were surprised by a spring butting through the leather itself as they sat down. We had hundreds and hundreds of people in attendance in the congregation, and I suggested, as I will in my remarks this evening, that I had prepared some I thought, significant comments, but I was sabotaged. The sound system was not working. Nothing seemed to work that day, other than the sheer excitement, the sheer change of recognition that we were now in our new home, and that life would become a little more organized, a little more productive.
Yes.
As a result.
Were there any longings for the old? I know it was a very beautiful old building. Were there any people
there
who
was.
expressed
People visited there.
longing for?
I think there were a number of mockers in the park next door. People would drive by, and we owned that building for quite some time before it was actually sold.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was Ami Shamir's Oren Kodesh finished when we moved in?
Oh no!
We did
no,
that
no.
much later,
Oh,
didn't
much
we?
later, much later. That took years later. Ami Shamir was the architect who designed what I think is a glorious ark, Aron Kodesh, and the dedicatory wall that we have outside. I spent days up in his studio discussing with him what his plans were and what he wanted to do. He was open to my own suggestions. I had this notion from the book of Genesis of Jacob's description of the ladder extending from earth to heaven, and of angels ascending and descending that ladder. I told him that for us, there's a Hebrew phrase or a Hebrew comment in which the rabbis suggest that the real exchange or the real communication between heaven and earth comes in the form of words. The Hebrew phrase, otiyot porchot bavir, letters flying off into space. He sensed my idea. Not everything that a rabbi imagines is possible in a practical way to do with the ark, to do with the work that he was going to do for the ark. I told him that I had wanted to open to the congregation their suggestions for biblical verses or biblical phrases that they thought should be prominently displayed on the lucite. Our plan was that the light behind the ark would be such that you would not see the lucite, but you would only see the letters. And the congregation, many people in the congregation had offered suggestions about those verses of the Bible that meant most to them, and we included many of them, some of them, on these lucite panels. We described in one yearbook what each of the verses were and what they represented. But the notion was Jacob's dream of a ladder extending from earth to heaven, and our way of saying that what this synagogue really is, what the sanctuary is all about, was our opening ourselves to the experience, the godly experience that Jacob felt, in which he said, ultimately, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh, surely God is in this place. And that was the feeling that I wanted to evoke. But that did not take place until a long time later. Yeah.
So you'd come here. There were some problems with the facility. What were the first set of priorities once you'd moved?
Well, as I said, the facility itself was not a finished facility. We were anxious to make sure that the children had the best setting for their education. Our congregation always had as its first priority the children of our schools. And that was a concern as to how we set up the school facility. We urged the patients of the congregation to see the sanctuary finished as it were. We debated some interesting issues in our planning stages. There were those who felt that the facility itself, or certainly the sanctuary, ought to be a traditional one, and that meant wood and warm colors and the like. And there were others who said, no, we're here in this setting, and the warm wooden panels and the like just wouldn't work. And of course, the building is a very modern building. Some people were happy, others were not. That's a given in the Jewish community. Right. But I think more than anything was we were growing into the facility that we had. We of course had there were many changes and construction, and we rearranged the drive, the door, the front door, and access to the schools. There were months that I sat in a construction trailer because the office of my study was not in the right place. It was a living experience. Right. There was a synagogue was an organism, and it was living as we were growing into it.
I should imagine, though, there was perhaps a sense of optimism and potential.
Yes, a lot of optimism. I think the change from moving from Springfield here, the optimism was reflected in the fact that we went from a 3-grade foundation school, and recognizing the burden of private education, costs to parents, and especially the financial burden to the synagogue and to the congregation. But the optimism was such that we recognize that we can now continue to expand on our school program. Year after year, we added grades. There were years where we were financially, the financial burdens were significant, and we had to put a hold on the increase of grades. But ultimately, we now have 8 grades in our Martin J. Gottlieb day school. But everything just kind of picked up. Right. The school program picked up. The youth program picked up, thanks to professionals that we had. And I was just able to do things that I was not able to do when we were downtown in the way of activities and education for adults and the like.
Yes, I was reading about your many activities in the yearbooks, and I noticed that at the end of your first year, President Jack Shorstein praised your work with high school students and with college students, and that a later yearbook even records that you used to travel with students to Gainesville, to Florida.
Yes.
Can you tell us how you engaged the youth and why it was important to you?
There was the synagogue was a strong knit family, really, an extended family, and I was both challenged by meeting with high school juniors who had enough of their high school and the burden of homework and the like, and they were asked to be going to a Hebrew school, or to additional programs, additional educational programs we call our confirmation program. The first years, the kids were just absolutely great. All through the years, they were just great kids. They were challenging and sometimes provocative, and high school kids being what high school kids were. But as I said, we were a strong knit family, and I felt very, very close to them. Many of them went on to college here, locally, University of Florida in Gainesville, to FSU in Tampa, in Tallahassee, and I would once or twice a year travel. We would have dinner at the Hillel House. Right. We would meet with them. There were sometimes 20 or 30 kids who came to dinner, and we kibitzed and joked and tried subtly to give them a religious message that they should, God forbid, not be aware of, that it was coming across as a religious message. And they were very satisfying hours that we went with them. Inga would always accompany me to Gainesville, and she had a way with the young people as well, and they appreciated her presence also. We also had a very committed group of lay people who were very interested in the youth of our congregation. And in our college program, I would write to the students every few months about issues that I thought were important for them to be aware of. On Hanukkah, we would send them Hanukkah gifts. On Purim, we would send them delicacies that were associated with the festival of Purim, and there was always an ongoing rapport between the synagogue and between these students. And I think the fact that so many of our kids who attended college and who enjoyed these overtures have now themselves become fixed leaders of our congregation.
Right.
There's nothing more satisfying than that.
And you still maintain relationship with some of those young people that you developed through teaching confirmation in college.
Yes. I am a. When I left Jacksonville in 2001, I became. I was still too active and still too anxious to be involved in Jewish life and the Jewish community. I became a rabbi, served as a rabbi for 15 years in a New York congregation. And the fact that former college kids, or kids that we raised, or kids who were confirmed, would call to make sure if they were working in New York to whether they could attend services in our congregation. Of course, we opened the door to them. We had one young man who not only was interested in maintaining this rapport with me and with the congregation that I served, he even became a board member of the synagogue in New York. Wow. Having grown up in Jacksonville, having been in our confirmation class, so I feel a very close connection to many of our young people.
They to you, and you used to take groups to Israel. Were those adult groups or were those youth groups?
They were adult groups.
Right.
They were very significant. I wanted to make sure that there was a close connection between the congregation and between the state of Israel. I had to reflect and to maybe to go back a little bit. Our synagogue, unlike some of the other larger synagogues in Florida and elsewhere, was isolated.
Right.
Isolated in the sense that the Jacksonville Jewish community was where it was. It was not a community like Miami Beach and Fort Lauderdale and some of the Jewish metropolitan areas. And the Jewish currents here, I thought were lacking. I wanted to expand on them, and we did a number of programs to bring to open these currents of Jewish influence and Jewish culture and what have you. And that was why I was prompted to spend so much time with adult education.
Right.
An extension of adult education was Israel, and it was a way of solidifying the relationship of the adults who would travel with us to the congregation. It was a way of encouraging an even closer relationship with me. And it gave me an opportunity to teach, even informally, when we were in Israel. I have many stories of people who were touched and moved by experiences that they had here in school. Just to cite one example, there was a gentleman who sang in our choir, an older gentleman, and he had one solo part. He sang with a very soft voice, and the phrase that he sang translated is, "And I will bring you to my holy mountain, and I will make you rejoice in my sanctuary, and my home, my temple, will be a temple for all people." It's a verse from the prophets. This gentleman was singing that throughout the course of his life. He accompanied us to Israel, and we had the opportunity of going up to the Mount of Olives. It was a time that Palestinians were still permitting that to take place, and there was a beautiful lookout place on top of the Mount of Olives where you could see the entire area of the mosques and, of course, the Western Wall and the like. And I said to him, I just took his sleeve and I said, "Sam, you have been singing about this all of your life. And now I want you to see what you have been singing about." And he began to cry. And it is uncontrollable because suddenly his life took on meaning, a meaning that was confirmed by the fact that he was in Israel. It must have been one of the religious moments of his life. But there were many times we traveled to the community of Yamit. This was after Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin had signed their accord in 1973, and this place was now going to be returned to Egypt. And as we traveled, Inga was with me, as we traveled with the congregation through Yamit, we came across the signs that said, "Asur la'akor natua," it is forbidden to uproot that which has been planted. And I tried to make them understand the planting that Israel was and how much we needed to assure that it would not be uprooted. Or services that we had, and I pointed out that the verses from the 84th Psalm were evident in your looking out and seeing the things and saying, that time is eclipsed. King David traditionally wrote the Psalms, but that's a whole other question. And you see this very same thing and just recognize how much that Jewish history has kind of coalesced around this moment of your viewing. So they were terribly moving moments, and it was edifying, I think, for those in attendance, and I think just built upon whatever experiences that they had in the synagogue at home, to see them confirmed in Israel.
Wonderful experiences. You did a lot for adult education. You not only took them out, but you brought people in. You brought in speakers.
A lot of speakers, yes. To extend the comments that I made earlier about the fact that I felt that we were maybe Jewishly provincial because we were so far removed from some of the other communities. It was terribly important for me to bring people who were current with what Jewish thoughts and Jewish values and Jewish events, Jewish current affairs, political, otherwise, scholars, and we would spend Shabbat studying together, and they were enriching moments for the congregation. Yes.
I have a list here of some of the activities, which is amazing. You developed the following programs. I've got Havurot, Harayim, Young Couples Club, 55 Club for Seniors, Men's Club, Performing Arts Series, Henry Kramer Library Lecture Series, Congregational Tours of Israel, which we covered, Shabbaton, Setzer Levit Memorial Lecture, Sisterhood Bat Mitzvah class, Sisterhood seminars, New American B'nai Mitzvah, Family Council, and Minyanes. That's, I don't know whether I've covered everything. So much activity. Was there any one program or initiative that you're really proud of?
The Sisterhood Bar Bat Mitzvah programs were, I think, terribly important. It was called Sisterhood Bar Bat Mitzvah, but they were men who attended these classes. They were extended classes. I was determined that they not be shallow and just looking at the highlights of Jewish history for one session and the prayer book for one session and the like. So they ran sometimes for 2 years and sometimes for 3 years, and they concluded with a Bar Bat Mitzvah celebration for the adults who participated in services and wrote the sermons and the like. And we, from groups of 15 to groups of 45, they were satisfying, certainly to me, because my mission of as a teacher was being fulfilled in those moments. We had the new Americans B'nai Mitzvah. We were blessed when the Iron Curtain came down and challenged when hundreds of former Soviet Jews came to this community. Synagogue was tremendously generous in allowing the students to come to our day school with tuition free. There were some lay people who were determined that we would help them learn how to use a bank and how to make appointments with doctors and the like, but also how to celebrate Shabbat and how to live their lives as Jews. And when we took a group of these former Soviet Jews and created a bar mitzvah class exclusively for them and concluded with a bar mitzvah celebration, I was always touched, even when I return to Jacksonville now, that these members, these people who continue to be members of a congregation, just embrace me, and you feel their gratitude. And as one pointed out, you took a family of atheists and you taught them, showed them the beauty and the significance of Jewish life. Those are just heartwarming. But the Shabbatonim, the weekend activities with prominent speakers, just to see the eyes of our congregants light up with a new understanding and just open to the currents that were coming into the community from outside was terribly important. But they were not only the one-time events. They were Talmud classes every Sunday morning. I felt very blessed in the many people who attended my conversion classes. We call them beginners Judaism classes. And when they began to play a role in the congregation following their conversion, and you knew that they felt very close to the community and to this significant choice that they made in their lives, that was a blessed feeling as well.
Yeah. What about intercommunal relations? How were they with sort of the Reform Synagogue?
Yes, we had rabbinic meetings that took place. I don't know whether monthly or bi-monthly or the like, about issues that face the community, about issues that plans for events that we should do as a community, whether Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Memorial, and other events. There were factors that sometimes had to do with some unpleasant experiences. Certainly some of our members felt where people working in certain companies were being coerced to identify with other religious communities and to give up their faith and the like. And I often had discussions, one member in particular, who was being challenged every time he tried to do something for his company about the fact that there seemed to be a quid pro quo, that if he did not do this, then his advancement in that company. So we discussed this on a communal basis. They were, for the most part, always very good meetings. We did a lot together. One year that I was, even though we were a small rabbinic group, I was the president of the board of rabbis of the Jacksonville Jewish community. A rabbi who lives in the north, who was the head of the New York Board of Rabbis, created a plan to travel as rabbis to Berlin, where we were received in a very interesting way by some of the giants of German industry. Siemens comes to mind and the like. Because I was a board member, I was the representative of the board of the Jacksonville Rabbis. I was included in this program. We spent a day with high school kids in Germany, and it was one of the satisfying days that I had. They were so misinformed about the relationship of Israel to its Palestinian citizens, and I needed to, I hope I made clear to them what some of the broader issues were and what they weren't being taught or told. But so we had a very well-functioning group of rabbis, and I think we respected each other, respected the pluralism that each of us represented as well.
There have been some unfortunate anti-Semitic incidences here in Jacksonville in recent years. Did you ever encounter anything while you were here? I'm not sure whether I didn't really encounter anti-Semitism per se. The only issues that we encountered, as I said, came perhaps from fundamentalist zealotry that was touching on the lives of members of our congregation. And that, but I can't say that there was any overt issues of anti-Semitism. Going back to the support that you had, you mentioned a very strong lay leadership. Was that ever challenging? Were there strong opinions that sort of got in the way?
Yes, in some cases there were, especially in the area of religion. As I said, I received a good deal of my mentoring from the Rabbi Waxman. I referred to him earlier. He wrote a book, Tradition and Change, and I'm going to point out, as when I address members of the community this evening, that we were very strong on tradition. We were very weak on change. I applauded the commitment of many of my members to things that are fundamental to synagogue life, perhaps not in southern communities, or again communities removed from the mainstream of Jewish life, but we had daily services every morning and every evening. We had people who were mourning who needed to say the mourner's prayer, and we made that available to them. We had services, as I said, every morning, every evening. The Sabbath was rich with services, but we were terribly remiss on the role that we permitted women to have, and the whole issue of egalitarianism was not being discussed at all. I had some confrontations with a strong personality who was a member of our congregation and was very, some people felt intimidating with regard to the changes that we wanted to make as a religious community. I pointed out that some of the traditional things that were being done in the congregation were not traditional at all. The reading of the prophetic chapter by a bat mitzvah on a Friday night was the least traditional thing that one could do. And I pointed out that even their understanding of the text, which seems to exclude women, was misplaced, because this was the position of one commentator who said, in effect, in Poland of the 17th century, in our communities we don't do this because of the honor for the congregation. And I pointed out we were not honoring the congregation at all. And very slowly we began to open up one honor of being called to the Torah to women, because that was traditional. And in time we began to include women to a point where when I left, it was, I think, women were participating, I think, in all aspects of the service. But it took a good deal of negotiation. There were hard feelings. There were times that I left a religious committee meeting because I just couldn't tolerate the intimidation. And because, as the rabbi of the community, was recognized in the conservative movement, that I was the one who made religious decisions. Mm-hmm. So in all things, some balance and some common sense and a recognition of the importance of tradition, and that our tact was evolution, not revolution. And that was the approach that we took, and I hope it worked without any. I'm sure there were hurt feelings, but nobody, as far as I can tell, nobody ever got up and said, "I'm leaving this congregation because the rabbi is going off on his own high horse."
So you were involved in so many committees, and within the synagogue and without the synagogue, and it seems to me like you were 24/7 doing activities. But when you look back, is there anything you wish you'd done but didn't manage to do?
Yeah, I'm going to tell the congregation that somebody asked me how my golf game was.
Right.
And I said I never took a day off to learn how to play golf, so I never developed that. Were there any things, congregationally speaking? None comes to mind, honestly. And if they did come to mind, I don't know when I would have found the time to do those things. I perhaps did not have enough time with my wife and for my wife during this period of years. I was consumed by, consume may be not the appropriate word, it sounds negative. I was just taken with the 24/7 aspect, and when you encompass the life cycle events from birth to death, celebrations and moments of sorrow, and services for those who are mourning beyond the funeral services, and speaking to brides and grooms about their weddings and preparing them not only for their wedding but for their marriage, which is a much important need for preparation. Services, preparing for services, writing, attending meetings, and so forth. It was exhaustive. Right. I, whether there was anything other or further, it just doesn't come to mind. Just doesn't come to mind.
And you ended your tenure in 2001?
2001, yes.
So when you got to 2001, the facility was in great shape. Did you feel like now you could hand over you could hand over something that was...
The facility was in great shape. I think equally important, perhaps more importantly, financial footing of the congregation was a much, much better place. My successors were able to bring professional help to the synagogue so that they would be supported, so that they would not have to live 24/7, could take a day off during the week. But for the most part, I see the synagogue in a very healthy position. I hope that that's so. Of course, I'm not on the scene, but from what I read and from conversations I have, there are always issues, there are always concerns, but from a financial standpoint, the congregation is in a very good place. I think the rabbinic leadership that is serving the congregation is just superb. The lay leadership that has retired and taking a back seat, as my friend Buddy Scherst, I don't know whether his seat is such a back seat, but to know that there are younger people who grew up in the community and were educated in the community and were moved in the community are now taking over, of course, with people in the background, I guess, serving as guides and mentors. I think the congregation is in a very good place.
That sounds very positive. So you have no concerns about the youth and the youth carrying on the traditions into the future?
That's always, regardless of who the rabbi is, that's a challenging thing for the Jewish community at large. We read the reports of surveys and the like. Our concern is that kids still identify, and the issues of continuity are terribly important. But I think that we have given them here the potential, the opportunity of having the best, both in the way of education and both in the way of rabbinic and lay leadership. And I'm just very hopeful. I will, in my remarks, comment on a Jewish philosopher of the Middle Ages who said that we are prisoners of hope. So we need to be hopeful, we need to be optimistic. And there are changes that are taking place. I think that questions about the denominations of different Jewish communities are being explored. I see a drop-off, of course, in many cases. I see renewal in different forms that are terribly important as well. The Chavurah movement that we began here is taking place in larger multiples in certain communities. I know this in New York, where people are experimenting with what they call renewal Judaism, or different forms of expression in which Jewish life is taken. Maybe we will, some of the formality of some synagogue life will be replaced with something a little more generic to the way younger people join and are moved by religious movements today.
But you see conservative Judaism as having a good, healthy future?
I continue to maintain that traditional Judaism, as far as I can tell, is conservative Judaism. I know that the movement is going through its challenges, and that has a lot to do with the fact that the center, and I mean with a small c, doesn't hold in many areas of life, politically and sometimes even religiously, but fundamentally I think we will come back to the center. I think the conservative movement the kids want authenticity, and the thinking kids want. There are kids who, there are those who, for whom religion does not mean much, but for those who do, I think authenticity is terribly important. And one of the challenges of synagogue is to convey that authenticity, and in that regard, it's not only rabbis who have to play a role, it's the synagogue membership who has to play a role as well in reflecting the authenticity of their own faith and their own beliefs and their own commitments, so that the children see models of significant Jewish living in the lives of the adults, to have any hope for it to be a factor in their own lives as well.
Looking back over your time here, so much has happened. Is there any one memory that stands out particularly?
Oh my goodness! Buddy was saying a little earlier, you may need a number of days. So many different things. I pointed out the gentleman who broke down in tears when he the memory of Jews from the former Soviet Union embracing me and telling me what I meant, what the synagogue has meant to their lives. I had a young lady, and I will repeat this again this evening, who was a child of 2 or 3, and she would enter the chapel at Friday evening services, and she would always approach me because I told her I would always give her a ride on my lap. She jumped. We don't do that anymore, of course, but we did, many years ago. This young 3-year-old is now a grown young woman who lives in New York, and during the Simchat Torah services this past year, when we celebrate with the Torah and dance with the Torah, she suddenly appeared, a familiar face. Oh my God, it's you. It's been so long. You are such a lovely and beautiful young woman. What brings you? Rabbi, I knew that it was Simchat Torah. I knew that you were here. I knew that you were conducting services. And I know it's a work day, but I'm here just during my lunch hour to dance with the Torah. And we gave her a Torah, and we were singing a communal song, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel lives. And she had the Torah in her hand, and her eyes was closed, and she had that fervent look about her. And it doesn't get better than that. There were moments, not only happy and joyous moments, but there were a lot of moments of sorrow. We as a congregation had to deal with a number of significant tragedies of young people. They were always the most difficult, of course. And whether it was a child with a brain tumor, or a young woman in my confirmation class who took selective surgery and never got off the surgical table, or a young man who drowned in an accident, his parents not knowing that he had this accident. Numbers of people gathered in their home just to comfort them. They knew nothing about why the people were gathered in their home. Neighbors had keys to their door, and we were all there, and they came into the house, and what are you all doing here? What and then she saw me, and she recognized, and I will never forget the look on her face when she saw me and recognized that this was not just a social gathering. Those were moments that you don't forget. A young woman who had cancer, the wife of one of the important, significant members of our congregation, who sat on my couch in the study, and she had just had a bone transplant and was not sure about, and I promised her that she would be well, and I couldn't keep my promise. And those are moments that are just, but more than anything, the happy moments, the being pulled in by a father of a groom to dance a hora at his son's wedding, and a young person reminding me that I had done his bar mitzvah. We were just in a downtown restaurant yesterday. There's a new kosher restaurant, and a young woman who was in my confirmation class, had been in my confirmation class, came in. She is working downtown, and just the happy enthusiasm with which she greeted me was special. Those are memorable things.
Wonderful. How have you seen Jacksonville itself changing over the years? Is it for the better?
I assume so. I think so. It seems like the community I think much more progressive and modern. I see the building going on. I make note of the fact that there are numbers of congregations that are here in the community. I hope it's a good sign. It's hard for me to tell, but the energy that I think that I feel from the community is all very positive.
And you moved to New York to become a rabbi where?
When I moved to New York, I became the rabbi of what's called the Conservative Synagogue of Fifth Avenue on 11th Street and Fifth Avenue. And the evening before, we were having dinner in another restaurant, and a member of the community who would visit us at the synagogue in New York came annually, just again greeted me with such open arms. The nicest thing, but he referred to it earlier in terms of his observation about the continuing connections, is during the high holidays when kids from Jacksonville would call, "Rabbi, we're in New York, is it all right if we attend high holiday services in your congregation?" We had many of those, and it was just special to know that our relationship was true and was still in effect, and that provides the greatest satisfaction of all.
How was that period? Did you develop as many programs there as you did here, or was it different setting?
It's an entirely different congregation. It's a much smaller congregation. It's an adult congregation. By that I mean that it is in a part of the Greenwich Village area where condos and co-ops and apartments are terribly expensive. The community there is a very small community of perhaps 100 members, all adults. We have no need for a Hebrew school because the children are going to private schools or day schools. And so it's services for the most part, and classes and the like. And what we needed here in Jacksonville, namely, we are a center, and what we should be is a microcosm of Jewish life, of arts and learning and music and the like, which we would not have had unless, Jewishly speaking, unless we brought it in. Right. New York, of course, has no need for that. So all of that is taking place in the larger community, and we were just concentrating on the synagogue itself.
And you're retired now?
I'm retired now, yes.
And what do you do in retirement?
What do I do in retirement? The synagogue that I was associated with, the rabbi who served for 3 years decided that he was not going to continue in the position any longer. I continued to give classes even after my retirement, and now with the synagogue, they're not having its own rabbi. I'm frequently called upon to lead a service or to give a sermon or the like, which I do happily. But I'm enjoying now the 24/7 that the days that I liked before, still not taking up the golf game, but that's that's a whole other issue.
And you visit Jacksonville regularly. How often?
I do. It's become almost annually. When I retired, one of the things that took place is the congregation set up a Rabbi David Gaffney Leadership and Education Award. So sometimes I attend to present that award. That has occurred on a number of occasions. Buddy brings me for events such as this on other occasions. Occasionally we come because there's a family celebration to which Inge and I are invited, and we happily attend. So it's been at least annually, sometimes twice a year.
That's wonderful. Do you have any advice for a new rabbi starting out?
What advice would I give to a new rabbi? Well, happily, Rabbi Lubliner has been here 13 years now. Yeah, I think he celebrated Bar Mitzvah here. First of all, to know that, at least from my perspective, it's not a job.
Right.
Not a job. It's not being a salesperson or being computers or something. You are involved in the lives of people. You're involved in the life of a 3,000-year-old tradition. If you're honest about who you are, and you're honest about what your mission is, what your calling is, and it is a calling, then you'll make mistakes and you'll take the wrong path. But if you know that you've given it your best, and what I mean by your best, from your soul, best, then you will have the satisfaction of knowing that you've tried in this area. But if you come in thinking that it's a job and that you will treat the lives of people and the needs of this ancient tradition cavalierly, then you will not succeed, and you will never have satisfaction of the things that you try to do. So it all begins with a mindset about how you approach your mission in life.
I hope you won't mind if I put you on the spot again, but there's been a dreadful massacre at a synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
And so it seems that we're conducting a historic interview, and it would be, I would like to get your thoughts on that incident and how you would comfort the Jewish community in the light of what's happened.
It was horrific. It was a horrific event, and have numbers of concerns. Anti-Semitism is one of them, but I'm equally concerned not only of anti-Semitism from the right, I'm equally concerned about anti-Semitism from the left, and there's a significant amount of that here in the States. I see it even taking on political form. I am equally concerned about an event like this, and the fact that concern for a wedge that might be driven into American Jewry vis-a-vis its relationship with Israel, as a result of the fact that there is ground is being made fertile for extremism, and we need to be wary about that. We need to maintain our connections with the community at large. I attended an event, a memorial event at New York University, which is where the synagogue really is. And it was wonderful hearing young people of all persuasions speak. It was wonderful hearing from the leaders of black churches, of an imam who gave perhaps the most moving address at that gathering, and to know that the same things are taking place in Pittsburgh. It's a delicate balancing walk which we need to take, of being able to reach out to other communities and recognize that decent people are in this together, and to recognize as well the dangers, both from the right and from the left, that exist outside. Hillel, a great rabbi, who put it, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And where we need to tread carefully is to make sure that we're looking after our own interests and our own security and our own need for security, and at the same time knowing that we cannot be a community isolated from the community at large. So horrific as that event was, it's kind of elicits a challenge to each and every one of us, Jews and non-Jews as well, not to allow extremism to take root in our country.
Wonderful, thank you. Is there anything we didn't cover in this interview that you would like to?
One of my congregational tours, we took Mrs. Galinsky with us to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
She was an old but sweet and quiet woman, and she took along, she had two accompaniments, again, a couple, who were, I don't know whether they lived with her or they lived near her, but they looked after her welfare. They came along to make sure that she would be well, and so this was she was one of the many members that we took. We came, when we came back to Jacksonville, I don't remember what point and what year it was, Bud, but Sheldon Ginzier, who knew her, and I went to visit her in her home in Riverside. She had about 10 cats in her home. We were dealing with cats. What?
They were the children.
No children.
Cats were the children.
Just cats. Just cats. And we spoke to her about the congregation, about what our needs were and so forth. She seemed to be very open to our discussions and eventually she left this very significant endowment boarding. It was, who knew? Exactly, who knew? Her husband, they were in the plumbing business.
Right.
Yeah, they were in the plumbing business. The two younger people who accompanied her to look after her died.
And she survived.
And only Mrs. Galinsky survived for years later. It was very interesting. But I think, I don't know whether anyone, but there's no question but that it was a visit from Sheldon and myself which got this ball rolling.
How much fundraising did you have to be involved in?
Well, look, I counted in the yearbook, I had about 12 different kind of fundraising campaigns. I have a list there that memory doesn't serve me. The Last Mile campaign, the Fair Share campaign, the campaign to complete the Jacksonville Jewish Center. I think every other year there was a fundraising campaign, and I was involved in trying to inspire and to promote, and in conversations with people, and in articles in the bulletin and the like, and the congregation, came forward.
We miscalculated the value of our property at 3rd and Silver Street. We thought it would be ready to sell very quickly, and we thought it would go for significant dollars, none of which occurred. Then we ended up with a mortgage that was tied to prime, and when I said the interest rate got to 18%, that's astounding, but that's what happened. So we made our share of mistakes, but we were constantly raising money year after year after year.
And the school, the school sapped.
Well, that was operating budget, but we also altered the facility itself on a number of occasions. Buddy, I remember sitting in, as I said, in a construction trailer for months while construction
Well, I
was
don't
being
know that
done.
we finished your study until you were almost ready to leave.
No, actually,
Sylvia
Buddy's
did that.
sister-in-law, Sylvia
Yes.
Shorstein, took that on.
Also.
And I think I enjoyed the study for about 2 years.
Yeah, not many years.
Not many
Beautiful
years, no.
study.
Right.
No.
Beautiful.
We had a lot of campaigns. Operating budget, we brought in Tree of Life, where Leaves for the Children. We brought in a scribe to complete a Torah scroll. We bought an imperfect and unfinished Torah scroll.
Oh, yeah.
And we gave the congregation and families an opportunity to sign their, or not to sign their name, but to inscribe a letter. And so if somebody's name began with if somebody's name was the name of a biblical subject who was featured in a particular portion, he took that portion. And so we try to personalize it.
That's wonderful.
And I don't remember how much money we raised, but that was a fundamental fundraising campaign.
Do you think that the
Shorstein's presidents.
Yeah, well,
Right.
that's another thing.
do you think that the community thought we're all in this together, we'll all pull through together? Was there that
I think
sense?
some thought of it more than others. You don't have 100% in any
Right,
community. Some are more committed, some are more devoted, and thankfully those who were had the ability, first of all, the generosity and the ability to make it happen.
We, by and large, even today, have around 10 families that really do the bulk of the
Major.
contributions.
Yeah.
And those 10 families are much better off today than they were 25 years ago.
Right. And did the split worry you? Was there any chance that it would split off even further, or
I'm sorry?
there was a split in the community? There was a second conservative
Yes, there was a
group. Was that a concern ever?
Yes. It was one of the major concerns when I arrived. It had happened on the eve of my arrival, and quite honestly, I had always felt that if our national movement, the rabbinic movement, had been a little more cautious in moving ahead and would have given a rabbi an opportunity to try to mend these difficulties, that would never have taken place. But there was a strong personality in the Jewish Center, another strong personality that was made up the other conservative congregation, and almost initially we were concerned about membership. We were concerned about retaining our members and making sure that our programs could continue to function. And I think there was an edge, let's say, to our relationship with one another as a result of this breakup, which mellowed after time, and of course emerged finally when the congregations were reunited. And one moment, I don't know whether we're going to record this or not, one moment that stands out above all others is that the son of one strong personality married the daughter of the other strong personality, and when the two of them, these two titans, came in and had to shake hands publicly in the eyes, in the presence of the entire congregation, that was something out of a book.
Romeo and Juliet.
Well, and this is where the rabbi really made a difference, because what was left of our congregation, the morale was as low as it possibly could have been.
Right.
Yet we slowly built the morale back and said, you know what, even so, even though we're a smaller congregation, it's time for us to raise the money, get out of the north side of town and get onto this property. And it happened with an undersized congregation, but the morale was at a low point after the split.
Yes, we had to deal with that, and I think it was repaired
Yes.
in time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where are your children and grandchildren today?
Well, that was, that's really
Great-grandchildren as
That's
well.
another issue, is that our children, one was, as I said, a little older than 13. My daughter, our daughter was 12. They were going to a very intensive. They were receiving an intensive Jewish education. When we left Jacksonville, there was nothing to equal that or parallel that. We had some private instructions. Jack Becker met with Usher and studied Talmud together with him, but it was not what they were accustomed to. And so 2 years after we arrived, our son said he had gone off to summer camp with the same types of students and friends that he had had all of the years. And he came back and he said, I know nothing. They are growing, and I'd like to go back to complete my high school education in New York. Thankfully, my wife's parents were the generous people and the loving family that they were, and they said, by all means, our son returned, and our daughter, a year later, said she wanted to do the same. They completed high school, where they studied in their formative years. Our son eventually went to Brandeis University, and then got his law degree at Cornell University. Our daughter also completed her education, went to Queens College, and is a very productive businesswoman in her own right. So our son had 2 children, and our daughter had a daughter and her daughter now has 2 children of her own. So we are proud great-grandparents.
That's wonderful.
One of the things we didn't cover, and this was my fault in looking at your questions, is our relationship with Camp Rama.
Okay.
That's true.
For probably the last 50 years, we have sent more children to Ramah than any other congregation in the South.
Yeah.
And that has been so important to this congregation.
That is an extraordinary blessing for our congregation, because the kids, both from an education point of view and an attitude point of view, they're molded in such a way that there's nothing like the informal setting of a summer camp, in which things that kids chafe at when they're in school, they welcome openly in camp, because it's taking place in that completely different setting.
Can you tell
One
us
of the things that we did.
You go.
No, Ramah wasn't even in existence.
Mark went.
I worked my way through college, partially running the dining room at Camp Blue Star, which was an outstanding, it still is today,
Yes.
an outstanding Jewish camp.
Yes.
Can I just jump in and quickly ask you to explain what Camp Rama is and where it was located?
Yeah, I think we ought to have Ramah in this thing.
Yes, Camp Rama is a camp that's sponsored by the Jewish Theological Seminary for kids from families of conservative Jewish homes. It provides everything that a summer camp. They are located in numbers of places. There was one in
Georgia.
I'm sorry.
North Georgia.
Well, now in Georgia, that's Camp Rama in the south. But there were camps in Wisconsin and in New England. The Rama in New England. There's the Rama. Yes. These are camps where the children have all of the camping activities that typical camps have, but with a very strong Jewish accent in terms of services, in terms of song fests and activities and culture and the like. And the kids come back with a just much more positive feeling. One of the things that we did do, I'm happy to say, is we insisted on bringing these experiences back into the life of the congregation. And so there was never a fall event in which children did not come to the pulpit and share some of the experiences with us, lead services, read from the Torah scrolls, and manifest their skills that they had developed in those camps. So we took their experiences and felt that it had to become something that the congregation shared. We did the same, by the way, with kids who went to USY, which is the program of youth program, not summer camp. USY stands for United Synagogue Youth. And one of their programs was USY on Wheels, where probably 3 or 4 or 5 buses of kids from conservative congregations, age 14 and 15 and so forth, travel around the country and visit Jewish communities around the country and see some of the sights of the United States, but see them also in the context of a Jewish experience. So if they went to climb one of the Rocky Mountains and so forth, they would have a dawn service on top of that location. And we incorporated their experiences also on a Saturday Shabbat program to share with the congregation. The youth, the education, and whether through our day schools and our youth programs and scouts and high schools and our commitment to scholarships that we give to Rama and to USY on Wheels, I don't think another congregation does quite what we do.
No, I always consider us a synagogue attached to youth programs. Instead of us.
The other way around. That's very impressive. What about the birthrights? Is that something that was
we did that as well. But here we're talking about college kids. We don't have quite that connection. Right. That would take place much more through the community, through the community at large. Right. Although we had programs. Our USY program also was a program which went to Poland, and from Poland visiting the camps or where the camps were, and then the concentration camps I'm referring to, going from there and then going to Israel, and that was quite an experience, going from, as what our youth director would write, from darkness to light. And Rama, this summer camp, also had a program in Israel as well, but that was done on the high school level. Right. Once they were in college, there was a birthright program and the like.
Can you think of anything else? My last thing was to allow you the opportunity to, if you wanted to say, give a message for your children and grandchildren.
My children and grandchildren, oh my God. Oh.
Put you on the spot of
That's the hardest.
May they continue.
Yes. One of the I refer to this in the context of the Shorsteins this evening. Buddy was a president of the congregation, and his brother Jack of blessed memory was the president who invited us to come to Jacksonville. 2 nephews, Mark Shorstein and Michael Shorstein, were presidents of the congregation when I was here as a rabbi. I recently attended a wedding for Michael's son, Matthew and Debbie.
Mark's son.
Matthew's for Michael's son first, Matthew and Debbie, and then officiated the wedding of Mark's son, Benjamin Nicole. So this embracing of this family from inception to these life cycle events. The phrase that I use is "Hachut hamshulash lo b'mheira yinatek," which means a cable, a cord that is wound 3 times with 3 generations of that family is not easily severed. That remains. The remarks that I would make to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they hear it from me all the time. But we sing L'dor vador nagid gadlecha, from generation to generation. We extol your works, O God. And I would like to hope and feel and have the confidence and trust that the things that were so important to us in Jewish life and in Jewish tradition, the Jewish community, the state of Israel, our sense of the fact that God's presence is always there. Jacob's statement is Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh, surely God is in this place, is not only in the sanctuary of the Jacksonville Jewish Center, is any place where we open ourselves up to Him, to God, to her, and to our tradition. I just hope that they know their roots and remain close to their roots so that we can continue to sing from generation to generation.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much, Rabbi Gaffney.
You're very welcome.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you very much. My God, it did take
This is
2.
much quicker than I thought.
It did take 2 hours.
Was that exactly 2 hours?
Thank you so
No,
much.
thank
They were
you.
very
That was
leading
beautiful.
questions
Thank
and
you.
very perceptive questions. Appreciate it.
Very good question.
Wonderful interview.